I've played the original Resident Evil more times than any sane person should. The game features 2 playable characters, each with 4 possible endings, and each of those endings has multiple branching paths and alternate cutscenes depending on your specific decisions and routes. I've done the math, and to see every possible story variation, you would need a minimum of 10 full playthroughs. And Resident Evil 1 in particular saw a wealth of re-releases in its lifetime. Within its first 2 years, the game saw 3 separate versions on PlayStation alone, as well as Sega Saturn and PC ports. Evidently, Street Fighter 2 had made Capcom way too comfortable with releasing the same game 6 times over. Like Street Fighter 2, each revision of Resident Evil brought incremental improvements, and as someone who's deeply entrenched in this franchise, I've collected almost every version. That includes the 3 PS1 releases, the Sega Saturn version, and even the Nintendo DS port that everyone forgets exists. That's not even getting into the GameCube remake and its remastered versions, and we don't even talk about the cancelled Game Boy Color version, which, yes, was real and probably would have been terrible, but every time I pick up a new version of this game, I get all 8 endings all over again. So, bare minimum, I've played the original Resident Evil no less than 40 times, and that doesn't include casual replays just for fun. With that many playthroughs under my belt, I now know the game like the back of my hand, and thus have become keenly aware of the subtle and not-so-subtle differences between each release. One goal I've always had in mind for this video series, beyond the overarching mission of simply playing every game I own, is to also spotlight how certain games evolve through their ports and re-releases. I've done this previously with the PlayStation versions of Mega Man X3 and Final Fantasy IV, and you could argue that compilation releases like Super Mario All-Stars and Sonic Jam also fit this bill. But Resident Evil presents a more unique case. In 1997, 2 re-releases launched on 2 different consoles just a few months apart, so I figured why not compare them side by side. In July 1997, the Sega Saturn received a port of Resident Evil handled by Nextech, a Sega subsidiary also known for third-party work with companies like Capcom and Atlus. The Saturn version aimed for a near one-to-one replication of the PS1 original, with changes mostly driven by hardware differences. There's still no auto-aim, you still can't skip cutscenes, and the American version remains censored. There are some gameplay tweaks. Jill now fires faster while Chris has a faster draw, but otherwise the campaigns remain largely the same in difficulty and structure. Most of the differences lie in presentation. Textures and backgrounds are lower res, but the character models are darker, bolder, and more detailed. In a way, this helps them blend better with the pre-rendered backgrounds, giving the visuals an overall more cohesive look. Obviously, being a 5th-gen game, there's no dynamic lighting engine at play here, but the darker palette almost creates the illusion of these characters being lit more appropriately in relation to their surroundings. The Saturn version introduces new enemies called ticks, which replace the hunters in the underground tunnels. They're mostly cosmetic, with one key difference. Their beheading attack is now performed up close rather than from a middle distance. Chris's campaign also features a second tyrant fight in the labs, which I'll admit surprised me the first time I encountered it. Unlockables were expanded too. Both characters now have 2 sets of alternate outfits, the second sets being unique to this port and this port only. Beating the game at least once also unlocks the new Battle Game, a sort of arcade-style reimagining of the main game that tasks the player with clearing 15 rooms filled with monsters, including a freshly zombified Wesker and a new, more durable gold tyrant, using a limited amount of ammo and healing resources. Upon finishing, players are given a letter grade based on time, item usage, and health remaining. Battle Mode doesn't unlock anything, but it's surprisingly addictive, offering a fresh, action-oriented spin on a game normally built around tension and puzzle solving. I now found myself having to deal with enemies that I would normally just try to avoid, and by the time I finally earned an S rank, I had developed entirely new combat tactics that I wouldn't have discovered otherwise, which I then found myself applying to subsequent replays of the main campaign. And spending so much time with this port also just reminded me how much I absolutely adore the Sega Saturn's D-pad. Underrated as hell, honestly. It's tactile without being painful, and its circular design makes diagonal inputs much smoother. I love this D-pad, like, on a sexual level.
What did he say?
Performance-wise, the Saturn version does lag slightly behind the PS1. Load times are longer and suffer from stuttering, though in-game slowdown is thankfully rare and brief. Some of the CG backgrounds were altered or received extra detail, mostly cosmetic changes, though a few were clearly driven by hardware limitations. For example, in the lab area, broken tubes replace intact ones, likely due to the Saturn's more complex handling of transparency effects. This also explains why the pools of blood left by dead enemies are no longer transparent. There are also a few odd audio quirks. One example is in the boiler room sequence near the end of the game. Originally, ambient noise increased in each room as you moved closer to the boiler, but that audio layering effect seems to be missing here. The save system, however, is much more forgiving on Saturn. While PS1 memory cards theoretically support up to 15 save files, players were arbitrarily limited to 5 per card. On the Saturn, this restriction is lifted, and unlike the PS1 version, the game actually remembers unlocked bonus items across save files. Even the act of saving itself is slightly faster here. Notably, the developers seem to have accounted for the Saturn's volatile internal RAM. In the event your save files disappear, built-in cheat codes can unlock the alternate outfits and the battle game directly from the title screen. No such luck with the Infinite Rocket Launcher, though. And while it isn't anything to do with the game itself, even the Saturn box art gets a glow-up here. Classy, eye-catching, and seemingly a neat homage to Evil Dead 2. Compared to the original PS1 release, the Saturn port is a step up in terms of content, even if the performance lags in some instances. Like the Saturn version of Mega Man 8, it has unique extras that elevate it, but nothing so vital that it renders the original version obsolete. It's not a flawless port, but I do feel like it's an underrated one. It's funny to think that in some other timeline, the Saturn port of Resident Evil may have been the last we saw of it. In the wake of RE1's hit release on PlayStation, Capcom was hard at work on a sequel. However, just as with the original Resident Evil, work on the sequel became troubled, drawing out the development process far longer than was ever planned. Sometime in 1997, as development on Resident Evil 2 reached roughly 60 to 80% completion, the team decided that what they had created so far simply wasn't very good. The game wasn't satisfactory. Something just wasn't working. In a bold and risky move, the team decided to throw the whole thing out and start over from scratch. One of the most anticipated video games of 1997 would be delayed by almost a full year. As an apology for this setback, Capcom would release an extended version of the original game to tide fans over until the sequel was finally finished. Enter Resident Evil Director's Cut, an enhanced edition of the original game released just 2 months after the Saturn port. This version includes several gameplay enhancements, most notably the reversal of changes made to the American release that acted to increase the difficulty. In short, this means you now receive 3 ink ribbons per pickup instead of 2, and the auto-aim function has been restored. The return of auto-aim alone makes the game significantly easier. It would be nice if there were an option to toggle it off, as in the sequels, but I wouldn't go so far as to say its inclusion makes the game worse, especially since it was always intended to be there. Oddly, this release lacks an easily accessible options menu, either in-game or from the main menu. The Saturn version featured the options menu right on the title screen, but here it's a semi-hidden feature, only accessible by holding Start and Select during gameplay. I'm not sure why something as basic as a controls menu would be hidden. It's not even mentioned in the manual. I only discovered it by pure accident. Upon startup, Resident Evil Director's Cut now presents players with 3 difficulty settings: Original, a simplified training mode, and an all-new advanced mode. Training mode is essentially the same as the base game, but made significantly easier. Enemies go down quicker, Jill and Chris have more health, and ammo and ink ribbon pickups are doubled in quantity. But it's advanced mode where things get interesting. This mode grants players an enhanced handgun that fires faster and has a higher chance of scoring headshots. More notably though, key items and enemy placements are shuffled, forcing even veteran players to rethink their usual routes. At least one key item has even been split into pieces, and you now get the Magnum much earlier in the game. However, since ammo and healing item placements remain mostly unchanged, it's best not to waste those powerful bullets too early. To compensate for the early Magnum, the puzzle room that once housed the weapon now instead gives you 3 full rounds of ammo for the gun, and clever players can exploit a glitch that essentially renders this ammo infinite. There's even a cheat code that enables double ammo pickups in advanced mode, just like in training. Some new scares were added too. A zombie now lurks just out of sight in a previously empty bathroom. Another can suddenly burst into a room while you're inside. Certain key items are deliberately placed to provoke new enemy encounters. For example, the armor key is found next to Forrest's corpse, which now reanimates as a zombie when you try to grab it. A previously optional room on the mansion's second floor normally only served to reveal to the player the existence of the heliport, but it now holds the battery needed to access the underground tunnels. And if you get too close to the window while retrieving it, a murder of zombie crows will swoop in. And remember that zombie from the FMV in the basement? Once completely ordinary, it's now twice as fast and is immune to headshots, finally justifying its dramatic introduction. Puzzle solutions, story events, and boss fights remain unchanged from the original game. What's really different here is the redistribution of items and enemies. In that way, Advanced Mode feels less like you're playing a whole new campaign and more like you're playing the original game with a randomizer. That said, Capcom did go the extra mile in one area. Many rooms, I'd say roughly half, feature updated backgrounds or entirely new camera angles. Some of these changes are purely aesthetic, while others clarify puzzle solutions or accommodate the new enemy placements. For instance, this mirror has been moved to the opposite wall to enable a new jump scare. The third boiler room now has ceiling grates since chimeras now appear there. In the guardhouse entrance, vines can now strike from any of 3 holes instead of just 1, which means you'll need to repeatedly reposition this statue rather than push it just the one time. And I especially appreciate how the crate puzzle in the labs has been made much more readable. Before, it was often hard to gauge spatial relationships between objects and the floor, but now they give you a nice straight-on bird's-eye view to remove any obscurity. All 3 difficulty modes also introduce another new set of alternate outfits, and this now extends to Rebecca's outfit as well. Advanced mode even ditches the closet key entirely. The closet is unlocked from the start, and characters wear their new outfits by default. The closet itself has also been redesigned to better show off each costume, presumably so the player can readily tell which one they're putting on. Since the closet key is gone, finishing Advanced Mode with the best ending now rewards you with a Magnum that has infinite ammo to go alongside the rocket launcher. Unlike the Saturn version though, you'll still need to hang on to your finished save files if you want to keep your unlocks. Save files are now color-coded by difficulty too, a small but thoughtful addition. While Advanced Mode isn't a replacement for the original experience, some of its changes did eventually carry over into the 2002 remake, such as certain enemy placements and camera angles. Most notably, Zombie Forest would return as well. At the very least, Advanced Mode likely helped keep fans invested while Capcom finished work on the sequel. In terms of presentation, Director's Cut is obviously based on the original PS1 game with minimal changes. That said, I did notice at least one alternate voice take used.
Don't mention it. What a monster. I can't believe. What the hell is this place anyway?
Don't mention it. What a monster. I can't believe. What the hell is this place anyway?
Oh, and Wesker's now shooting a giant spider in this scene instead of bees. Because I guess spiders are cooler. Now, many of you familiar with the franchise are probably expecting me to bring up the music in this version. Quite infamously, the director's cut featured an entirely new, and most would say worse, soundtrack that replaced all of the game's original music, but there is a bit of a misconception here. While people often associate the director's cut with the replaced score, that's actually only true of the DualShock edition released in 1998. I'll go into more detail about the DualShock version in a future video, but for now, rest assured, this one keeps the classic music. What I will address, though, is that neither of the director's cut versions, original nor DualShock, feature any of the uncut content or cutscenes from the Japanese release. Despite what all the ads and even the CD sleeve claim, this version still features the same black and white censored intro from the original US release. Reportedly, it was Capcom's localization team that dropped the ball on this one, but to their credit, they did post the uncut FMVs on their website as a form of compensation, for whatever that's worth. Household internet access wasn't at all common in 1997, and downloading video clips over 56K dial-up in glorious 240p wasn't exactly ideal. Still, it's worth acknowledging that Capcom owned the mistake and at least tried to offer something in return.
Resident Evil 2.
This standard director's cut release also included a second disc featuring a playable demo of Resident Evil 2, which, let's be honest, was probably the main attraction at the time. Now, obviously Resident Evil 2 has been out for decades, but there's still something fascinating about revisiting old game demos, and so I gave this one a quick once-over. The demo covers the early portion of Leon's A scenario, ending with the first visit to the STARS office in the Raccoon City Police Department. The FMV intro is missing, as is the cutscene that introduces the first liquor. The opening sequence among the streets of Raccoon City is also much shorter than in the final game. A van that usually blocks off an alleyway is gone, creating a major shortcut that skips a large number of screens. The shotgun has been relocated to an earlier room so players can still get their hands on it during the demo. though you can also pick it up from Robert, just like in the full release. Kenneth and his cutscene are absent, and there's no need to mess with the computer in the lobby. Instead, players fight off a small group of zombies to retrieve the key needed to progress. These keys all have placeholder names and icons, and Leon's character portrait hadn't been finalized yet either. Typewriters are present but non-functional, however, the one available item box does work. The only obtainable file in the demo is Chris's diary, located in the star's office, where the demo abruptly ends with an obstructed appearance from Ada. This is clearly just a teaser, since in the final game she doesn't show up until much later, and it's actually Claire who meets up with Leon here. One particularly curious difference here is that this demo reveals that Robert Kendo's voice was altered before the final game hit retail. The dialogue uses the exact same recordings from what I can tell, but for whatever reason, in the full release, his voice was digitally modulated to sound deeper.
Who are you? What are you doing here? Sorry about that. I thought you were one of them. I don't have a clue. By the time I noticed something was wrong, the entire city was infested with zombies.
Who are you? What are you doing here? Sorry about that. I thought you were one of them. I don't have a clue. By the time I noticed something was wrong, the entire city was infested with zombies.
Why Capcom chose to go out of their way for a character who has like 3 total lines and immediately dies is anyone's guess, but hey, sometimes developers make odd calls. All in all, Resident Evil Director's Cut was a pretty solid consolation prize for the delay of RE2. Where I said the Saturn port didn't make the original PS1 release obsolete, Director's Cut absolutely does. There's really no compelling reason to go back to the original Resident Evil if you have this version, unless you specifically prefer the extra difficulty that comes from the lack of auto-aim. The battle game mode remains exclusive to the Saturn version, and aside from a few cosmetic changes like the console-specific outfits or the tick enemies, that's the only major feature missing from Director's Cut. Over the years, Director's Cut became the de facto version of RE1 that would be bundled in collections and sold on digital storefronts. Most of the time this was specifically the DualShock edition, but more recently Capcom has shifted back to the standard Director's Cut, likely due to the controversy surrounding the DualShock edition's composer. And that's something I'll definitely cover when we get to that version in the near future. So, between the Saturn port and Director's Cut, which is better? The Director's Cut, clearly. That said, let's not completely count out the Saturn version. Aside from some minor performance issues and slightly longer load times, I think it is better than the vanilla PlayStation version, but only the vanilla PlayStation version. The Saturn port includes the fun little battle game mode, and in my opinion it just barely edges out the PS1 graphically, but Director's Cut just offers significantly more content with all its alternate play modes. Even if you remove the RE2 demo from the equation, Director's Cut still wins out easily in terms of overall value. There's a reason it's become the go-to version of the original game for modern releases. That being said, I still have a soft spot for the Saturn port, and I've kept it in my collection for a reason. PS1 players aren't missing out on anything essential, but the extra outfits and arcade-style mode are still a fun bonus. And strangely enough, whenever I get the urge to revisit Resident Evil 1, this is often the version I gravitate toward. Maybe it's my inner hipster wanting to go against the grain, or maybe I just like the way the graphics look. Who knows? But either way, it's a version worth appreciating. In any case, both versions represent fascinating steps in Resident Evil's early history, and show just how much a single game can evolve through iteration.